Welcome to the program. I'm Min Sun-hee with our panel of foreign journalists. It's good to see you all again.
Nice to be back, thanks.
It's been about 2 weeks since President Moon has been in office. What were some of the stories related to the president that caught your attention this week, Koichi?
Well, President Moon said that he will tackle the air quality issue and suspend the coal-fired plant, which is older than 30 years. I thought it was, very swift move because everybody was concerned about recent air quality in Seoul.
Right, that's true. What did you read about, Elise?
Well, we were just joking on the sort of fluffier side. There's a lot of international news actually about Moon Jae-in's bodyguard. So a lot of personality coverage, both in the Western media, but in the Japanese media too, about the handsomeness of his staff. But in a more serious note, obviously we've followed the appointments and what those mean for the new administration. A lot of sort of transitional type things. Moon Jae-in is also making a lot of news for being kind of an everyman. Really putting on his own jacket and taking off his own jacket without any help, and walking out to lunch and eating at the cafeteria. So a lot of these sort of, hey, I'm a normal guy things, sharing his schedule publicly. A lot of these things are a vast contrast from Park Geun-hye, his predecessor.
Right. Frank?
Well, I'm looking at the story that Koichi mentioned about the air quality. That's especially a concern for foreigners. I have a young daughter, so it's nice to really hear that South Korea seems to be taking this issue quite seriously. He also mentioned he's going to put sensors in, I think, more than 10,000 elementary schools around the country to more carefully monitor the air quality. That's encouraging. Also covering, of course, the sort of policy shift that we have in South Korea toward North Korea as Moon seeks engagement with Pyongyang.
Right. And along with all that, President Moon pledged to create jobs. And this campaign pledge was given priority on his first day at work, following his call for the launch of a jobs committee assigned with the task of expanding employment opportunities. In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at the new administration's job policy.
Immediately after assuming office on May 10th, President Moon Jae-in issued his first order of business. That was to establish a jobs committee. This had been one of his key pledges while campaigning for the top office.
국가일자리위원회는 일자리 정책의 컨트롤 타운 대통령 집무실에 일자리 상황판을 걸어놓고 대통령이 직접 매일매일 점검하겠습니다.
The committee is under the purview of the President and will draw up and review job-related policies. President Moon will chair related meetings himself as the committee head. With this, the Moon Jae-in administration is expected to step up its policies related to job creation. At the top of the list will be creating 810,000 jobs in the public sector.
왕관, 또 경찰관, 또 부사관 다 부족하지 않아요? 공공부 일자리 중앙뿐만 아니라 지방에도 만들 여지가 많이 있습니다.
In the private sector, the President has pledged to create an extra 500,000 jobs by cutting working hours and encouraging workers to take their annual holiday. Improving the quality of jobs has also been a key agenda. The new administration says it will reduce the ratio of irregular workers from the current 32% to the OECD average of 11%. Not only that, the administration has vowed to transition all irregular jobs in the public sector to regular jobs over its 5-year term.
비정규직 문제를 반드시 해결하겠다고 약속을 드렸습니다. 우선 공공부문부터 임기 내에 비정규직 제로 시대를 열겠다 이렇게 약속을 드리겠습니다.
The Moon Jae-in administration has put jobs at the forefront, vowing to shake up the employment market and institute sweeping changes. A lot of attention will be on whether this promise for change will bear fruit.
Now, before we delve into the issue here in Korea, perhaps we can talk a little about the situation in your respective countries, starting with you, Koichi. What's the job market like in Japan?
I think partly because of Abenomics, well, that unemployment rate is historically low, 3%, compared to or 6% 5 or 6 years ago. It's dropped sharply, and even younger generations are getting good job compared to some years ago.
Right, and we'll delve into that later in the show. What is it like in America, Elise?
Well, unemployment is also at a historic low in the United States following a period of great recession, when Barack Obama came into office some 9 years ago. So things are looking much better. There's a lot of talk among the manufacturing sector about a lot of folks not looking for jobs anymore, and that actually artificially keeping the unemployment rate down in the United States. But the job market is much better. The economy has been looking up, and consumer sentiment is fine now. It's yet to be seen what happens in the years ahead, but so far so good.
Right. Frank, what is it like in Canada?
Well, as Elise mentioned, sometimes it's difficult to read through these statistics because they don't take into account the number of people that aren't looking for jobs. In Canada, the official unemployment rate is about 6.5%. So it has fallen a little bit recently. But when you look at the demographics of that, it showed that there's a lot more sort of older workers still working. And the reason for that is because a whole bunch of people just turned 55 from the baby boomer generation. So it inflated some of the figures. And as I mentioned, people not looking for work deflate the figures of the unemployed.
Mm. Do you think it's harder to find employment today compared to a decade or two ago?
It depends on your education level. So in the United States, which I can speak to, there used to be two paths to prosperity. Blue collar, so you worked in manufacturing, you did things with your hands, you built things, and white collar, so you went and got educated, you went to college, and then you used kind of your intellectual or cognitive skills, your people skills in order to be successful. What has shifted in the United States over the past few decades is that blue collar path to having a middle class life has almost completely gone away. And so now it almost requires, the job market almost requires that you get not only a high school degree, but also a college degree in order to be employable in the market. And then what happens to all those artisans and people who worked on assembly lines? A lot of them have been the folks who have been left out of the economy in the United States as it shifted from a manufacturing-based economy to one that's service sector-based.
Right. Here in Korea, Koichi, what do you think is the fundamental problem in the job market? Is it long working hours, or is it because people are looking for just quality jobs, or?
I think there is a huge mismatch between the job openings and especially college students, their desire to get this kind of job, but there's a small opening for that. This kind of mismatch is one of the biggest problems. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's a mismatch between the young students coming out at 23, 24 years old with a college degree. They'd been told by their parents and peers that if they go through university and they study hard, when they reach job age in their mid-20s, that they'll be able to find some work using the skills and intellect that they developed at university. South Korea has a very, I think a positive phenomenon in that a very high percentage of the population here does go on to university and earns a university degree. But there just aren't those jobs for those people. Previously in South Korea, maybe 20 years ago, the previous generation didn't have the same numbers of people, the same percentage of the population graduating from university and expecting that type of employment. That's changed now. And that's sort of where that, I think, mismatch developed.
How do you respond to President Moon's creation of a jobs committee? Do you see this as being effective in creating jobs for the people, Koichi?
Well, yeah, I think so to some extent. But while the election days, there was a big debate between President Moon and his rivals. The President Moon said that he will create jobs through public sector. And his rival said, job has to be created by a private sector.
시장이 일자리를 만들어내지 못하고 있죠. 그럼 이제는 공공 부분이 선도적으로 좀 일자리 만들어서 민간 일자리에 마중물 역할을 해야죠.
And it was interesting debate, and listening to that, I couldn't decide, which one is right. Both of them has a good point. So I'd like to wait and see how President Moon implements his pledges.
Right, and how he'll tackle the issue. President Moon's job-related policies include, like Koichi mentioned, creating 810,000 jobs in the public sector, also abolishing the system of short-term contract workers in the public sector, and raising minimum wage, reducing work hours. What, Frank, do you think would be a priority for Korea?
Well, that's a lot of jobs for the public sector, first off. 810,000 jobs, that's going to balloon the public sector, and it's going to cost some money. I have heard that South Koreans are willing to pay more taxes, and I think that's encouraging. When I first came to South Korea and I got a paycheck from a South Korean company, I was astonished at the small amount of income tax that I paid compared to Canada. So I think that's encouraging. In terms of the job market, you only live once type of philosophy of life coming to South Korea, I think people are changing their feelings about their workplace and their connection to their workplace, and they're becoming more cognizant of their own lives and their connection to their families. So the trend or habit of workers working until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, working on Saturdays, all of these sorts of issues I think are going to be developed through a change in understanding of how you should be spending your time, and driven somewhat by workers as well.
Right. Is there a pledge that we could perhaps add to President Moon's current job-related pledges to perhaps strengthen it? For example, improve working conditions for single mothers, or a better support system for maternity and paternity leave?
Yeah, I think the women factor is really missing here. Korea is having the fewest babies, fewer than Japan. And so in the short term, you could still be thinking about having more women in leadership roles, for example. Something that Shinzo Abe tried in Japan was to create a quota of 10% of women in leadership roles or at the tops of boards in Japan. They couldn't make it, actually, because they had so few women that were in sort of middle leadership positions already. But if you sort of started putting benchmarks on that and started to better count the number of women that are represented, you can't sort of know where you are or where you need to be unless you take a count first. And so I think that's kind of a baseline thing that needs to happen in order to get this society wanting to have more babies, really, in order to have an economy for the future.
Right. Ensuring employment opportunities remains a task for Korea's foreign counterparts as well. In this next report, we take a look at how other countries are dealing with the problem.
Korea has been struggling with relatively high unemployment in recent years, but this is a problem shared by many other countries. Leaders around the world continue to look for different ways to create more jobs. Last year, US President Donald Trump, while campaigning ahead of the election, argued American jobs had been stolen by other countries and pledged to bring them back home.
I think you're going to see a tremendous change in this country. We're going to see jobs come back. We're going to see companies come back into our country.
He campaigned for so-called Trumponomics and said he would create jobs at home by reducing the US trade deficit with protectionist measures, revive manufacturing and boost investment.
We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American.
US unemployment now sits at its lowest since May of 2007, with the April jobless rate coming in at 4.4%. Meanwhile, in Japan, the job market is booming. Some experts say Abenomics, driven by the three arrows of monetary easing, fiscal stimulus and structural reforms, is what has led to a strong labour market. Others point to social changes such as the country's low birth rate and aging population as the reasons why there is a surplus in jobs for the country's youth.
学生にとって売り手市場というのはすごく私たちも感じておりまして、やっぱりその企業からいただく求人の件数も近年かなりやっぱり増えております。
Compared to Korea, Japan and the US, European countries are struggling with stubbornly high unemployment rates. In France, nearly 1 out of 4 youth aged 15 to 24 is said to be looking for a job, highlighting how tough conditions are. To tackle this, French President Emmanuel Macron says he will cut corporate taxes, reform the labour market and reduce public spending.
C'est pour cela que je veux porter, dès le début du quinquennat, des réformes économiques et sociales ambitieuses.
Governments around the world continue to look for better ways to breathe fresh life into their job markets, as work for many goes beyond just making money and ties directly back to their well-being and happiness.
Elise, as I shared in the report, President Trump's job policy for America is geared at largely protecting Americans from competition in the job market. What are your views on this?
I am skeptical about it, frankly. This idea of sort of economic nationalism flies in the face of the globalism that has been something that America's previous administrations have advocated, whether they're Democratic or Republican. And so to see kind of protectionism as a result of Trump's policies and his positions is worrying. But he's only been in office for a few months, and so far we haven't seen a scrapping of the NAFTA trade agreement yet, or which he promised during the campaign. We haven't seen him label China a currency manipulator. In fact, he reversed on that and said China was not a currency manipulator. Same goes with the relationship with Japan. That is maintained. It continues to be strong. We're not seeing any sort of attacks on trade with Japan yet either. So there is a difference between the rhetoric coming out of the mouth of the American president and the reality of what's happening on the ground. And so far, things are holding in terms of America's trade relationships with the rest of the world. And I think I'm hopeful about that for the most part.
Koichi, you mentioned this at the start of the program, the improvements in the job market under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Tell us a bit more about it, because in the report we talked about how the improvement could actually be because less people are looking for jobs. How do you respond?
Yeah, it's partly true. Well, Abenomics itself is, just Japan's economic growth is around 1%, so the achievement is not that great. But still, as I mentioned, that the ratio of job openings to job seekers is almost 1.3 to 1. So in theory, if you want to get a job in Japan, then you get a job. But the reason why is, as you said, just Japanese population is shrinking. I heard that almost the working age from 16 to 64 dropped. 3 million people disappeared in these 4 or 5 years. So, the job market itself is good for job seekers. And also, another explanation is we are expecting to have an Olympic game in 2020. So that explains quite a lot of parts of construction boom in Japan.
Right. Frank, in Canada, what policy with regard to the job market is in place under Prime Minister Trudeau?
Well, mostly it's infrastructure spending. He's decided to run large deficits in Canada, sort of a Keynesian economic plan to, again, generate massive infrastructure projects across the country. Through that will generate employment. It will also generate deficits. And so he's, perhaps going to run into trouble later on. He's a liberal, a left-wing government, and that's been his sort of platform, as opposed to the previous government that relied on sort of resource development and a stricter, balanced economic policy.
Elise, what do you make of the argument that creating a corporate-friendly environment will, in effect, create more jobs?
What does corporate-friendly environment really mean, though? I mean, that's kind of the question. A lot of times it means lack of regulation, right? Well, it certainly means that in the United States. And there's plenty of things that I think are worth protecting by regulation. For example, clean air and clean water. And so I would say corporate-friendly environments need to be balanced against the need for public good. And in the US, we have tended to go towards more corporate friendliness. We've seen that in China as well, which is really destroyed their environment, and there's really long-term impacts to that, like the costs of national health and healthcare. So my answer is that would have to always be balanced, and it depends on what you mean by corporate friendly.
Right.
South Korea Moon has vowed to increase corporate tax, I think from 22% to 25%. And you would call that, you know, not definitely corporate friendly or business friendly move. Another thing that he's done in terms of the environment is he's pledged to take diesel cars off the road. They've become much more popular in South Korea because, you know, they're more fuel efficient, but they release more of the 2.5 particulate matter into the air, which is so damaging to one's health. So he's pledged to take these off the road, and you've already seen a little bit of pushback from the business lobby, especially the automotive lobby, against that move. And even some transportation companies are saying, look, this is going to cost a lot of money. But, you know, he's again going to try to stick to this policy that maybe is a more people-friendly strategy.
How do you respond to concerns over the possibility of further declines in the job market amid the onset of artificial intelligence workers? Elise?
Well, this is something that Frank has talked about in lots of previous shows, and I think that his point that he made earlier in this program is a valid one, which is that we have been expecting technological innovation to replace workers, human workers, for a long time. This has been something that many people have foreseen, and yet that hasn't happened at the rate that we expected it would. And so to expect that AI would replace workers at a faster trend, I think is probably misguided. I mean, I think that it's still valued enough in the in the sort of labor market that humans are behind things, and also humans also not only get retrained, but also become entrepreneurs, right? And then start new companies to replace or to sort of fill new needs. And I think that what we really need, as I spoke to earlier, is more innovation in ideas and risk-taking, venture capital, just opportunities for people to start companies and make their own future.
Right.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that you know, we'll always have a certain number of people be unemployed, but what technological innovation does, in addition to perhaps push some people out of work, it encourages those people and other people into new business opportunities that will generate greater public goods, more convenient inventions for everybody to use.
Right.
Totally agree with that. You know, it is an opportunity, but still, when I see the news that you know, computer start writing article, then I'm a bit worried.
Right. Well, Koichi mentioned this earlier as well. There are limitations, there are restrictions that the government is likely to face in its attempt to expand job opportunities. But what would be a productive role to be undertaken by a country's government to ensure that employment is out there waiting for its people? Frank?
Well, one of the curious things that I did, you know, when I was sort of preparing for the show is I went to the Government of Canada website. The first tab at the top, jobs. That was the first tab. Find a job, click. It was like right on the main page of the government website. So it views itself, I think, the government as a sort of helping hand, a facilitator to help people look for work. If you're a company and you need somebody, you know, to fill a vacancy, you can go to a government office and you could post an ad. I remember when I was, you know, 16 years old and I was looking for a part-time job, I went to a Canadian government office and there was a job posting boards on boards that you walked around and looked at little cards that had jobs listed, and I applied at some of those jobs. I think I might have got a job there, but my sort of traditional way of looking for a job was to wear out some shoe leather and walk down the street and knock on doors. But I think the government does view itself as a facilitator to help put job seekers and job providers together.
Right. Well, in a survey of some 3,000 people earlier this month, more than half called for reviving the economy and creating jobs as some of the priorities of the new administration. Let's hope that these wishes of the people are well met by the new government. Thank you for being with us.